Hey guys, this is Garvin from Dublin Tour Guide, private walking tours of Dublin City. Today I'm here with Emek Ataman from Ataman Tours in Helsinki, Finland. And Emek is going to tell us about the most interesting aspects of architecture in the capital city of Finland, which is Helsinki. So, Emek, take it away and blow our minds.
Thank you very much, Carmen, for the opportunity. And as you're saying, when it comes to architecture, Helsinki is definitely a gem. And of course, there are many reasons behind this. One of them being the variety of styles that you can find in such a small place, actually, like Helsinki, which we call like the pocket-sized metropolis. And in order to explain it a little bit, I just want to give you a little bit context. So I will share some maps with you to talk about the history of Finland a little bit, and definitely Helsinki. So, when you look at where Finland and Helsinki is located, it's definitely in the most northern points, but most importantly, surrounded by important countries here, Sweden and Norway, and then Russia. And the great influence on Finland is coming from both sides, both from the west and the east, because Finland was ruled by the Swedish kingdom for 600 years, and then Russian Empire for 100 years, and then became independent in 1917. So just by looking at the map, and the geographical location, you can say that it's definitely a transition zone between east and the west. So this is very much reflected in the architectural styles that you can see in Helsinki. Of course, another point is about Helsinki's history. And Helsinki wasn't the capital city until 1812. So this is a very, very important point. Before Helsinki, you can see here, actually, Helsinki is located right on the shoreline. But here there is another important city, Turku. Turku was the capital of Finland during the Swedish reign. So one of the earlier cities established here was Turku. Helsinki was established in 16th century by the Swedish kingdom. However, it became the capital after Russian Empire took over in 1809. So its history is very much related with the Russian influence. So it became the capital during the Russian era. And then the city was such a small city that it was basically constructed from scratch. And during that construction period, the Russian Empire preferred the city to look like a Russian city, just like St. Petersburg. So today, the old town in Helsinki is called Small St. Petersburg because it really, really looks like it. And of course, the location of Helsinki is also important. Here you can see basically Turku, Helsinki, and St. Petersburg. Turku was the closest point to Stockholm. And then the Russians thought about it and then wanted to change it to Helsinki, which is basically a very close distance from St. Petersburg. And here you see Tallinn. This area was such a short distance. The Russian Empire thought that if they protect this location, then their capital would be safe. So that's definitely the most important political and, of course, military decision that was done at the time. So during that time, as I was mentioning, there was Russian influence. It was important for Helsinki to create these great wonders, which is the Senate and the University of Helsinki and the Helsinki Cathedral. But the interesting point is here that all of these buildings and many more was designed by a German architect. It wasn't a Russian or a Swedish or a Finnish architect. So immigrant architects at the time are very important to both Finland's architectural history and also Helsinki's, because before the German architect Carl Ludwig Engel designed all of this, it was a French architect who was the head architect of the state, and then an Italian architect. So from French to Italian to German, there were important architects that were basically the leading actors of Finnish architecture, basically.
Yeah, so you have those influences coming in from the outside. Yeah, and I think, you know, smaller, less significant countries, no offense to Finland, because I'm also including Ireland in that group, have had to, you know, import these finer artists because Finland, as you've mentioned before, was a poor country, and Ireland was a poor country as well. So we didn't have the resources in terms of the social structures at that time because of poverty to embrace the artistic artistic intelligentsia and that part of society. And just a quick note about Ireland. This is one of the reasons why Ireland produced so many great writers as opposed to architects or painters, because a pen is a good bit cheaper than oil paint, you know.
Definitely.
So that poverty, it does have a positive influence, you could say, in some ways. So that's kind of the start. That's Helsinki in the 1800s. And then, of course, at the start of the 1900s, Helsinki, like everywhere else in Europe, starts changing. And as you said, 1917 is when Finland gets independence. And there is indeed a need around that time, before and after 1917, to establish what makes Finland Finnish and this kind of national identity. So there is a push towards something that's a bit more secular, a bit more parochial, a bit more local, a bit more Finnish, and a bit less, you know, international or non-specific to a place, non-endemic, right?
Yeah.
All right.
So at the time of the century, of course, that was when Finland was establishing its national identity, and around that time, the idea of being independence was really starting to felt by the whole society. And at the coming to the turn of the century, there was also oppression coming from Russian Empire, which created an impact on the society that everybody literally came under one idea, and that was independence. And this was reflected in many different fields and in many different ways. So one important aspect of it was definitely architecture, just like music and sculpture and theater plays and everything else. Architects also got that idea and then continue with creating new styles. For example, if we just fast forward to 1890s, let's say, you would see these type of styles, which we would call national romanticism, which is actually taking the most important style of Jugendstil and important aspects of Jugendstil and combining with the national folklore and national epics and the national myths of Finnish people. So great examples of this are still can be found all over Helsinki and also all over Finland, but a couple of most important ones, and this is the National Museum of Finland, for example, right at the turn of the century. And then comes the National Railway Station from 1910. Of course, the opening was delayed a little bit up until 1919, but these are considered as great examples of that national romanticism. And there were many other public buildings of that era, basically giving you the hints of Finnishness, as you were mentioning at the time. So this was also very important for Helsinki, because now you can find over maybe 650 buildings with this Jugendstil and national romanticism in city center even today.
And would that one there, the National Railway Station, would that be kind of the most typical example of that national romanticism architecture? If you had to pick one building, would it be this?
If I had to pick one building, I would go with the National Museum of Finland.
Oh, the previous one, yeah.
Yeah, the previous one.
Well, I like that because that does have those motifs. You have a cruciform shape there, if we can go back to it, and then you have some vertical lines. So that strikes me as well, typically Scandinavian in general, and of course Finland would be included in that. So that's quite interesting, and it's somewhat, I don't know, it's somewhat reminiscent of a fairy tale as well, and partly because you have the granite there at the bottom with this kind of design of these crenellations before it goes into the painted beige or white section on the upper part of the building, and that's quite interesting. You've rarely seen that.
Definitely.
So there is
that part over there where you would see some type of eclectic, motifs, because it's basically a combination of things. It's not one very unique style over there. Of course, from different angles, this museum looks quite different. From another angle, you would say, this is definitely a university or a gymnasium. And then from the other side, you might see it like with the statues of animals, like a bear statue, etc. And then you say, this is looking like a fairy tale. And then you look at the tower and you say, this should be a church. So of course, there are lots of eclectic things, because that was definitely the time they were in search of a new style that would be their own. So that gives you that the idea of how it became the national romanticism, how it became to be called that. Definitely.
So that was like their pot lunch, where they just kind of threw everything into the one dish, and then presented it to everybody and asked, okay, which elements did you like, or which elements you're not so fond about? So that was kind of the start, because you said that was the 1890s, right?
Yeah.
It was really kind of at the start of the nationalistic movement, right?
Exactly.
Kind of the search for independence. Okay, so then we're into the start of the 1900s, and 1917 we get independence, and then we're going into the middle of the 1900s. So in general, I mean, maybe the start of the 1900s are quite interesting because of Art Deco, and I can see the influence of Art Deco in
the railway station. Exactly.
Sure.
Exactly.
And then later on, like in the 1950s and 60s and 70s, we have, at least in Ireland, a lot of brutalist architecture. And it's quite funny because, one of my tour guides has said that if you're walking around Dublin, the best architecture was built by the British, who left in 1922. And anything that looks ugly was built by the Irish, because it was built in the middle of the 20th century and in that brutal period. So it's funny, we like to laugh about that. But yeah, what happened in Finland kind of in the middle of the 1900s? Because you had something that didn't really affect us too much. We weren't so affected. Dublin wasn't that much affected by the Second World War compared to most of the rest of, anyway, continental Europe in terms of destruction. Was Helsinki affected as much as some of the like German towns and cities, or was it more like Dublin and that it kind of stayed out?
Yeah. Now this is definitely one of the turning points in recent history for Finland, because Finland wasn't a part of the Second World War per se, but it fought the Winter War with the Soviet Union in 1939, and then in 1940 and 41 there was the Continuation War, followed by the Lapland War. These were the first two fought between Finland and Soviet Union, the third one between Finland and Germany. So if you come to think of that, of course there was devastating effects, but one important factor was the incredible air defense that Helsinki had. So there were enormous air raids coming from Soviet Union 1940 and 41, but Helsinki definitely defended itself beautifully. And after the Second World War, when the committee from Soviet Union arrived to check for the damage they had caused, they were surprised because there wasn't much damage. It was superficial to the buildings, and everything was still standing in the city center and all around. And even the civilian casualties were way lower than most of the European capitals where they were razed down. it didn't happen in Helsinki. So that's one important aspect, that how all these, for example, that functionalist styles of 1930s and 40s just lived alone, as well as the architectural styles coming from 1870s and 80s, 90s. All of those buildings are just still intact, and many of them are actually used according to their original purposes. So that's one important aspect of Helsinki.
Great. Could we see? Do you have some examples of those buildings from that?
Yeah, for example, I can. Yeah, definitely. I can go with this beautiful Olympic Stadium, which was constructed. Yeah, definitely a wow effect here. This was
so
yeah. Yeah, it was constructed in 1930s because Helsinki was going to be the host for the Olympics in 1940. Finland was really coming to the world stage and it was showing its newfound power. However, because of the Second World War, the Olympics was cancelled. So buildings like this, the Olympic Stadium, and then, for example, this Lassi Palazzi, a beautiful center for, the shops and boutiques and galleries, museums and cinemas, etc. They were all built for the Olympics, but wasn't used until 1952. In 1952, Helsinki was the host. But importantly, all of these buildings just survived the Second World War, which is a very important point, definitely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we had, funnily enough, Ireland was vying for the Olympics in orbit in the 1930s because it was seen as, okay, you're a nation that can stand on your own 2 feet now. The next thing is to suggest that you're on the same level, culturally and in terms of infrastructure with the rest of Europe. Unfortunately, our bid was not successful and we have yet to host the Olympics. We'll keep trying. But it looks like that building could still be fit for purpose nowadays, right?
Exactly. And the thing is this, there was this renovation that was continuing for more than 2 years, actually. And now the Olympic Stadium is opened again. And now it's going to be used again for different purposes, all different types of games, etc. So it definitely looks like new because of the great renovation skills the Finns have. All of these public buildings, even the residential buildings, are always renovated according to their originals. So that's definitely one way to keep all the beautiful styles of architecture intact for our children and their children's children. And the other important point here is that, of course, renovation is important, but mostly announcing that these important examples are architectural heritage sites also. So they are protected with the law. It's not just the renovations, but also the law protects these great examples. Because of that, all these buildings are safe.
In recognition of their architectural merit.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
So that's very interesting. So, you have Helsinki that starts off Swedish, somewhat, if you could say it, and then becomes quite Russian, and then starts eking out and carving out its own Finnish identity. So obviously, if you were to look at Finland or go to Helsinki in 1900, you'd feel like you were in mini St. Petersburg. If you were to go to Finland in let's say 1950, would that still be the case, Emmik? As compared to, say, nowadays, where one might say that, okay, no, it's more recognizably Finnish than Russian.
Yeah, so this is a good question. What I would say is this. When I'm taking my guests through Helsinki, I also talk about this point and I say, look, we will start with the old town, for example, and you will really feel like, this looks like St. Petersburg. And you're right, with all of that neoclassical architecture, definitely the defining character. And then we will just walk 1 kilometer. And suddenly you can say that, this really looks like Stockholm, because then you come to 1880s, 1890s, and then you will start walking maybe less than a kilometer away, you will start feeling, now this is different. This doesn't look like Stockholm or Copenhagen anymore. And then it starts to really look like Helsinki, because then you will see those beautiful Jugend houses with national romantic influences, and then that transition period between that with the railway station, for example. Then you will walk another kilometer, come to the modern center, let's call it, surrounded by public buildings. And I can also give you some examples here, just like this great Finlandia Hall by Alvar Aalto, or if we continue with this beautiful new central library OD, then you will say, this is the, the mark that the Finnish architects
Wow. So you
put
said it
on this
very well
on this
there,
great,
that when
great
you're
urban places. Yeah.
when you're exploring Helsinki, it really, it doesn't all just mesh into one. What you see are, you could walk through the history. You can see the Russian foundations, and then the Swedish influence, and then the Finnish national identity kind of manifesting itself in the architecture. So that gives me a good image of what it's like to actually go around Helsinki. Yeah, and that last building you showed is fantastic. Could you tell us a little bit about that, the National Library?
Of course, of course. And as I was mentioning, Helsinki was a small city. And then with becoming the capital, it started to grow. And this was a slow growth, and the city was expanding as it's on the shoreline. The southern side is the Baltic Sea. It was expanding towards the north, towards the west and the east. And with each, the new need to establish new neighborhoods, etc., they were adding new buildings, new public centers, public buildings, etc. This just continued it still continues basically. Now Helsinki has a very giant metropolitan area, but the buildings in the city center, they continued to add more. Whenever there was this new need for other public buildings, there was these new additions, but in time, as architectural styles were changing, all these new buildings also had new characters. So this last one is basically opened in 2018. It's one of the newest additions here. And, Helsinki is a city known also for its libraries, more than 50 public libraries in the city. And this is the new central library. This was designed by Finnish architects also. And it has beautiful symbolism around it. You can just see all of that wood surrounding the library. It's very important. Finland is a forest country, so wood was the real element that was used everywhere in Finland. And you can see here from this corner, it also looks like that the nose of the ship, and ship making basically saved Finland during just after the Second World War. And they paid their debt by selling the largest cruises and the ships to different parts of the world and paying their war operations to the Soviet Union. And over there, let me just share one more picture from here. You can see that this is inside the OD library. Look at the ceiling, that white rolling hills. That's Finnish landscape. This is a country that doesn't have mountains. So what you have is these rolling hills from Helsinki to Lapland covered in snow. So there are many, many layers of symbolism in this building, and this is a really good example of the contemporary styles that you can see in Helsinki today with all of its details, basically.
I'm really glad. I think everyone there is really glad that they put that that motif reminiscent of the landscape. They put it on the ceiling rather than the floor.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people would fall into those holes, those little burrows. Yeah, so you can see a lot in that building, right? And even inside, you have some trees as well, just because they're never too far away from the snow, right?
Exactly. Those are live. Yeah.
And could you just go back to the previous picture, because I think that's a fantastic shot outside the library. Yeah, that's
this is this is the entrance to the left. Here you can see. Of course, there are other entrances around the library also, but definitely a beautiful shot here. Yeah.
Yeah, that's brilliant, and I think that you're explaining the history there of the building as well, and how that when Finnish people walk by it, obviously if they know the symbolism, it means a lot more to them than just, oh, that's a cool building. Look at the curves and look at the straight lines there. That's interesting. So, I mean, it really connects with the people. And it's great that you, giving private tours, are able to do that for your guests, where you explain to them, hey, here's an interesting building and, you know, here's some facts about it. But more than that, here's why it's important. And I think as tour guides, a lot of people, a lot of tourists, a lot of travelers don't realize that it's the interpretation skills that we bring that are probably the most valuable part of our role as tour guides, to really get you to see Helsinki as a citizen, as a Finnish person would see it and how they would feel it. So I think maybe this is a good time to kind of close up, but I'll just tell people a little bit more about you and your services. So you've been guiding since 2017, and you are the highest rated tour experience on TripAdvisor. Well done, congratulations.
Thank you very much.
PhD in urban studies, and so you're qualified as a city planner, hence the interest in these public buildings and architecture in general. And yeah, do you want to tell us a little bit more about your company and what kind of tours you do and where people can find you?
Sure. So as you mentioned, I've been creating these tours and mostly focusing on, you know, private tours since 2017, and I believe that is really the best way to capture the reality of a city, because each one of us has different interests and different preferences, and when we are in a group of, you know, 6 or 8 or 10 people, sometimes it can become a little bit difficult to really make everyone happy about the tour. And what I want is that people ask questions about politics, about education system, about the economics, about the architecture, about the planning, and about, you know, culture, and what does a Finn do? And then you can get the real answers, correct answers to that according to what you're asking. And you will of course dictate the route and you know, the pace when you're on a private tour. That's basically why I do these private tours, and I've been doing this with my company. People can easily, you know, reach out to me. It's www.atamantours.com, and they can select a variety of tours from my website and book a tour for themselves there.
Great, yeah, and we'll have a link to that in the description.
Definitely.
Perfect. Okay, Emmik, well, this was a great chat, and of course we wish we could stay and chat for a couple more hours. But I'm hopeful that we'll be able to do a few more videos about Helsinki in particular, and then just Finnish culture in general. That'd be brilliant, and I think a lot of people would enjoy that. So I want to thank everybody for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. If you have any suggestions or comments, leave them down in the comment section below, and we'll have the links there in the description. And the final word I'll leave to Emmik. So Emmik, is there anything else you'd like to say before you say goodbye?
Yeah, I would like to tell people that, you know, of course we have mentioned mostly the details about architecture, but Helsinki is a city that offers a lot. This is basically the most important cosmopolitan area and the beautiful metropolitan area in Finland. So there is so much to basically discover all around Helsinki. And whenever people think like they want to have this best Christmas gift for their friends and families and colleagues, Helsinki is the place to go.
Brilliant, because then the parents, the young family can go, and the parents can get satiated by a tour with you, and then the kids can be rewarded for, you know, giving the parents a bit of slack there by going up north to Lapland, where Santa Claus actually lives.
You're right, definitely. You're right.
All right, Emmik, great chatting to you, and I'll talk to you soon. Take care.
Thank you very much, Garvan. Take care.
Thank you.